Hi there, it's Marla at Narrate. In this week's message, Adam asks, what if slowing down starts with becoming emotionally aware of our appetite for consuming and producing? Have you ever considered how much of your life is dedicated to consumerism? This week begins the first message in a 5-part series focused on slowed down spirituality. Enjoy.
So here's the question. So if you're kind of here this morning going like, I don't know if I want to go this month, here's the question, and it's going to determine whether or not you want to come back later this month or at any point in this month. Because the question that I want to mess around with for the next several weeks, really through Super Bowl Sunday, is this question of what if the need of the hour is for a slowed down spirituality? Like, what if the need of the hour is for a spirituality that can at times rescue us from the frenzied, frantic, borderline insane pace of our culture? And I don't know if you can relate to this, but I'm guessing and building a whole series on this idea that there's this sense in which like we're always thinking, but never thoughtful. You know that? Like always going, but never present. Like often surrounded by people, but still feeling pretty lonely in the rhythms and patterns of our lives. Do you know that whole thing? And I want to say this before we get too far into this, like a slowed down spirituality is, if you're not familiar with Narrate, maybe you're still checking us out, trying to understand whether this is a place that fits who you are and who you hope your family will be. We are not cultural critics. In fact, we pride ourselves on wanting to be a part of culture. We've said from the very beginning that when we open the scriptures, we see a God who invites us to create culture, to be a part of culture. The reason we do Christmas Eve at the Civic Center, the reason we helped host Helena Elves for Trails, the reason we do the Mount Helena Easter egg hunt and the egg run and many other things is because we want to be at the center of culture, because we're convinced that we agree on far more than we disagree. So I don't want to be misunderstood as fulfilling some kind of prophecy that you may have or some stereotype that churches are just places who are criticizing how wrong it is out here and how right it is in here. That's not my point. Nor do we mean by slowed down spirituality that we're looking for some life that is completely opposite of that. I'm not saying that slowing down becomes the end, if you know what I mean. I'm not talking about quitting jobs or becoming Amish, though I don't think there's anything wrong with that, and some days it appeals to me. What I'm talking about is a Jesus who can speak to the pace and rhythm of our culture and strategically rescue us from it. So when we step into it, we are present, we are connected, we are thoughtful. There's a picture in my head that kind of forms this whole series, and it involves my friend Mikey Tomrup, and many of you will know Mikey. We call him Mikey T, the man, the myth, the legend. He and his wife Kelsey host our high school gatherings at their house. They host high school students there, and then they cook them a meal, and they have these conversations. Mikey is the salt of the earth. Friends and I have referred to Mikey as pure as wind-driven snow for some time. Well, I've known Mikey since he was in middle school. He actually moved here with us to help start Narrate and to be a part of leading the Narrate kids. He was on staff actually, and in the first few months in a staff meeting, so one more bit of background. To his credit, as he moved up here part-time to help lead Narrate kids, he also decided on his own volition that he was going to go volunteer in a local elementary school. And so I don't know how he chose Jefferson Elementary or how that all went about, but it says something about his character that he's this 20-year-old kid going like, I'm going to go volunteer at an elementary school while I work at this church and help form this Narrate kids culture. Now he's a teacher and works at Bryant School and continues to be a legend. Anyway, we were sitting in a staff meeting, and he disclosed to us that he'd, just kind of randomly, that he'd recently been called into the principal's office. To which we're like, how does a volunteer get called into the principal's office? And he said, well, the principal called me into his office to tell me that I can't push kids on the merry-go-round anymore, which I'm sure has long ago been taken off the playground. Is there still a merry-go-round at Jefferson? It's probably gone because of Mikey. I was like, why does the principal have to call you? And he said, well, I was pushing this kid on the merry-go-round, and there were several kids, and then he's pushing. I asked his permission to share this story, by the way. And eventually things are going faster and faster, and so there was just one kid left, and the kid just kept saying faster, faster, and so I just kept pushing it faster and faster, he said. And at one point, he was having a blast. He said so much so that he was holding onto the outside bar, and his feet were straight out from the merry-go-round. And he's like, and I was pushing the kid, and he was having a blast, and then all of a sudden, he just let go. He said he was all hurt and banged up, and he ended up at the nurse's office, and then the principal found out that it was because I was pushing him, so she said, I can't push kids on the merry-go-round anymore. And he was dumbfounded. And finally, someone said to him, hey, Mikey, he didn't let go. And he was like, What do you mean he didn't let go? And he said, dude, it's called physics. Like, you bucked him off of the merry-go-round. And he genuinely did not understand that he had just flung the kid off the merry-go-round. That to me is the picture. And I'm not convinced, by the way, that our times are unique. When I open the scriptures, it seems to me that one of the human patterns is we live faster and faster and faster, and we find ways of doing that, and then we get bucked off. But to me, the pattern is this. Is there a Jesus who can rescue us from this system where we go faster, 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 get bucked off, get healed if we don't die in the process, get healed, come back, start slow, faster, 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 get bucked off, whether that's a divorce or a failed business or whatever that looks like? Is there a Jesus who can help us find ways to live within our days and our weeks, not constantly, but as a tool to help us live with a wiser rhythm through the rest of it? And one bit of research, and I'm indebted to a guy named John Mark Comer who's compiled this, and I reference that on the mind map page. But he suggests, and this research suggests, that one way to make sense of some of this is to look to some of the innovations that have happened culturally, especially for us mostly living in a Western European culture, what's happened with technology. In fact, they would point first to the monks, these Christ-minded people who were trying to find these rhythms and patterns by which to follow Jesus and help other people do the same, who became really passionate about what they called fixed hour prayer, which is their way of saying they wanted to pray at the same times every day. It was the monks who led then to their own development of what we would know as the mechanical clock. Of course, keeping track of time is not a new idea to them. There's been other attempts. But the clock that we are so familiar with, many would say, was developed by these monks. And in 1370, the very first public clock was hung in Cologne, Germany, which means before that, people in Europe didn't live their life based upon the rhythm of artificial light. And if you guys can't find a seat, you can totally sit on a heat register or something, whatever you want to do. Just make yourself comfortable. And there's there's two right up here. I'm not trying to be a jerk, but seriously, if you need a seat, there's some up here. Or you can sit on someone's shoulders, or you can come at the 11:30. Either one, whatever works best for you. 1370 is when this clock went up. And so went the creation of artificial time. Before that, of course, time was determined by the earth and its rotation on its axis, and you had shorter days in the winter, and we all know that. How many of you, when December 21st hits, you just yes, only gets better from here, right? Summer, the days get longer. Next big innovation is 1879. What happened in 1879 was Edison's light bulb, he and his vast team, which, by the way, when I was working on this and looking at the research, I don't know how many times I was like, certainly it was longer ago than that. In 1879 came the light bulb, and historians and cultural thinkers, what they will point to is that only further allowed us to create artificial time. Now we're not subject to the sun and its rhythms. Now we can do whatever we want, whenever we want, so long as we have electricity there. Then came, especially in the mid-20th century, what is commonly referred to as labor-saving devices. How's that for a misogynistic advertisement right there? Your goose is cooked. This is one example, and many of us, maybe some of you can remember earlier days, but what happened were these, the invention of the oven, the wash machine. You know, it used to be that when you to heat your house, you had to go outside and cut down a tree or go outside and shovel coal and then cut the tree up into pieces and then at times put it inside the fireplace. And some of you are going, thanks to my husband, we still have to do that. But nonetheless, it's a novelty now. It used to be a have to. All these devices were developed that saved us time. The things that we used to have to do to just survive and stay alive, suddenly they became mechanized and done for us. It used to be if you wanted to talk to somebody, you had to write them a letter. There was this thing back then called penmanship. It was the strangest thing, like you could write and people could read it. It used to be if you wanted to talk to someone, you wrote to them or you went and actually talked to them. Now we have this thing on our phone. And don't get me wrong, I like Siri. But what the point here is, what they're pointing out is that things were just spinning faster and faster, and there's this ironic thing happening where we're getting more and more leisure time, but we're more and more busy. Many of these devices came along. In fact, there were so many of these devices that in the 1960s, there was legitimate conversation among academics and sci-fi thinkers and futurists and even the government, and the concern was that the pace of these innovations is coming so fast that in the future, we're not going to have anything to do. In 1967, a U.S. government Senate subcommittee issued a decree saying that by 1985, the American work week would be 22 hours a week, and the work year 27 weeks a year. How's that going for you? In fact, more recent research says that our leisure time is down 37% just from the 1970s. So do you see this? There's this ironic spinning. Then something else happened in the 50s, and I can't relate to this at all, but some of you can. How many of you can remember a time in Helena when on Sunday there was nothing open? This thing called the Sabbath. Anybody remember in your hometown where on Sunday there was just nothing open? If you wanted to buy something, there was nowhere to go. You're a much younger or more reserved crowd, I've got to say, because there's very few hands up. What people like myself take for granted was that, not even driven for necessarily religious reasons, it used to be that no matter how many hours you worked during the week, no matter how fast the pace of your life was Monday through Saturday, come Sunday, there was this built-in stop because there was no shopping to be done. There was nothing to do. There was nowhere to go. Then came 2007. And some historians say that the year 2007 will go right next to 1440 in the annals of Western history. 1440 was Gutenberg's press. What was 2007? The iPhone. Yeah. 2007, Steve Jobs and his team issued their first iPhone, and now psychiatrists and clinicians and historians and futurists, they're all telling us that the iPhone has literally changed what it means to be human. Education to be one field that suddenly has to reconcile, what do we do with the fact that everybody has information access to all the information instantaneously? Infinity is in most of your back pocket. You can know anything. You can see anything. You can buy anything. Do you remember when going to a big city, the fun of going to a big city was the shopping that wasn't available to you in your hometown? It's gone. You have infinity in your back pocket, and people are starting to say it changed what it means to be human. Here's some data. This is from a 2016 study. The average iPhone user in 2016 just physically touched their phone 2,617 times a day. Just the average. Now, one of the funny things, I'm going to throw some more stats at you. To me, what's hilarious is, none of us like to think of ourselves as average, right? When you're talking about education or intelligence, or we're all above average. But then on these, when it's bad to be above average, we're like, well, at worst, I'm average. I'm pretty sure I'm below average. But the average iPhone user is on their phone, staring at it physically 2.5 hours a day over 76 sessions. Now, that alone is pretty astounding. The average young adult, and I'm going to argue that even if you're not one, the ilk of this place is that you live like one. The average young adult is on their iPhone 5 hours a day over 85 sessions. Now, let's just do some math. By the way, one of the things I missed from Edison was that before Edison, the average American slept 11 hours a day. After Edison, the average American sleeps 7 hours a day. And some of you are like, who are they? I want to know how they do that. I don't sleep 7 hours a day. So if the average person is awake 17 hours a day, if the average young adult iPhone user is awake 17 hours a day, and therefore they fall into the 5 hours, 85 sessions, here's just my attempt at the math. Maybe I got it wrong. You can do it for yourself. That would mean, go ahead to the next slide, 3.5 minutes, 5 times an hour. Every waking hour. To fulfill those kinds of hours on a 17-hour day would require something about 17 minutes an hour on your phone. Or to break it just into pure percentages, that's 29%. Nothing ironic about that, is there? I'm in church, but I can't miss my phone. None of us have ever done that, I'm sure. 29% of your life staring at a screen. So here's the dichotomy that I want us to begin to step into. What if the need of the hour? Because there's all this conversation of what is the relevance of local church when we can get podcasts? What's the relevance of church anyway when we have psychology? What's the relevance of any of this when we have science? What if the need of the hour is for a spirituality, an honest, historic spirituality that can somehow speak to this and slow us down? Not always, but strategically. What if the need of the hour is for a slowed down spirituality? I wonder if the next step in that conversation is that the first thing that we would have to do to slow down is to become emotionally, cognitively aware of the fact that we are surrounded by consumerism. And again, it's not my attempt to rail, but I wonder if we're aware of just how predisposed we are and how culturally conditioned we are to see ourselves as consumers and producers, and mostly consumers who at times have to produce in order so that we can consume some more. You know what I mean? Have you ever just stopped to consider like just how much of your existence, be it looking at a screen or physically shopping, have you ever considered how much of your existence is dedicated to consumption? I mean, even those of us who like our recreation, I think if we're honest, if we're not careful, we like our hobbies, but we like shopping for them more than we actually like doing them, right? And again, it's not my attempt to be this giant cultural critic, but I do wonder if we're emotionally aware of how much of our capacity is dedicated to this thing called consumption. Now, here's one of the tensions that I have to live in for this series. Is we committed to this series a couple months ago. Some research that I'd been doing and some work that I'd been doing and just kind of trying to pay attention to things. It's the way we roll. And when we started talking about it as a creative team, I could see the look on a couple of the guys' face that the ideas that I wanted to talk about weren't deep enough, to be honest. That we were just touching the surface. We weren't getting into it enough. And frankly, what I was planning to get into, we had done that before in other series, and series that were worthwhile, but nonetheless, we had done that. And the trouble for me was I've been working through some stuff both at a class at George Fox last semester and personally through some stuff and some kind of about to turn 40 kind of crisis stuff. All this stuff has been colliding in me where I realize that I'm, in some ways, my whole spiritual worldview is kind of getting messed with, but I wasn't ready to talk about it, and I genuinely thought we were going to talk about it next year at best. But when I looked at these guys and I saw the looks on their faces and I was starting to pay attention, I went, wait a minute, we got to get into this now. So here's one of the tensions that I have to live in is I'm with you in this, and I hope I'm with you in everything. But what I mean is many of the questions that I want to ask, I genuinely have not resolved yet. Like, for example, I think there's incredible wisdom to this idea of the biblical Sabbath. The good news is I'm not ready to prescribe it to anyone because I'm not even sure how I would practice it myself. But there are these massive questions, and at the very top of that list for me is what I've been saying to myself, the gospel according to Amazon. Just how are we aware of how much of our life is dedicated to wanting things and working so that we can get the things that we want? In fact, one of my aha moments, quite frankly, was when I sat with my friend Craig to talk about the Backyard Initiative way back in November, maybe it was even October, and he started to share with me his desire to send these fourth graders to this trip to Yellowstone Park, and he explained, and many of you have heard me say this, I've said it a bunch from the stage, Hannah said it a bunch, that part of what we understand about lower economic status people, and I'm certainly not trying to objectify anyone, but what we know culturally is that those people tend to, maybe you're one of them, tend to value stuff over experiences. And I've said that out loud, and I heard him say it, but I've had this kind of guilty thing happen every time I've said it, and the guilty thing has been this: I don't think it's just them. Like I had my own conflict for quite some time where I went, wait a minute, they say this is true of lower socioeconomic status people. I'm not among them, not bragging or whatever, but I'm not among them, but I think I'm guilty of the same thing. And I've wondered, do we have that stat completely right? Now, I've heard that idea like echoed in several places. It's a commonly held idea, but I wonder if in 2018, if we're seeing it in its entirety. I wonder if the way we say it is that those of us who are of a higher economic bracket, we value things just as much, but we also have the luxury of doing some experiences, enough experiences to convince ourselves that we're not just about stuff, you know? And I was living through all of this on Christmas, and the thought that hit me was, if I really valued experiences, the way we go about celebrating Christmas, my family would look quite different. Because we often talk about how we don't have the money to go here or do this or rent that or do any of these things. But if we're being honest, the money we dedicate to celebrating Christmas through gifts, we could get an Airbnb just about anywhere we wanted, couldn't we? What if we're just as guilty as valuing stuff over relationships with God, with self, with others, over presence, over thoughtfulness? You know, one of the other things that happened to me, just to prove like I'm with you in this, this last Tuesday, so I got to the office and I had a little bit of apprehension, still do, about this whole series, because normally I can see 6 months out, and on this one I, for whatever reason, can't see 4 weeks out, though I can see the next series. And so I got into my office Tuesday, and I was ready to start compiling this and kind of writing on my whiteboards and doing the mind map thing on my wall. And I got about 10 minutes in, and then I was like, wait a minute, I need to open up the Evernote file that I have because I've got all this research, and I'm really prone to doing this thing where I start working hard on it, and then I get to Thursday, and I go like, what the heck am I talking about? And then I open up my notes, and I realize that I spent the last 2 days on a tangent that means nothing. And so I decided I better open up my computer and look at my Evernote entry. And I opened up my Evernote entry, but I didn't go to Evernote, or I opened up my computer. I didn't go to Evernote. I went to my email. Not because I was looking to answer any of you in a timely fashion, but because I was looking for a hit, if you know what I mean. This consumer hit. And at the top of my email list was an email from Joe Ellis, the Broncos president of football operations. And it more or less, so I was like, well, I got to read that. And it more or less said, sorry, we stunk this year, but as a concession for how terrible we were as a team, we're not going to raise season ticket prices, which doesn't mean anything to me. But I thought, well, oh yeah, that reminds me. There's a press conference today. I wonder what's going on in the press conference. So I went over to Roto World, which is the best source of sports information, and I spent a couple minutes there. And here's the irony. The whole time I knew what I was doing. It wasn't even like I checked out. The whole time I was like, no, I'm supposed to be doing this. In fact, I'm teaching on this, but I'm not going to do it right now. I'm going to do this. And then when I was on Roto World, there was one of those articles, and none of you ever click on these. It was one of those like 40 images you never thought you'd see, or like 40 pictures that should have never been taken, like those, like nobody clicks on those, clearly. There was one, 12 gadgets everybody's going to have in 2018. And I, like many of you, am in this place now where I'm like, well, I kind of have everything, but on Christmas, I have the one thing I generally don't have, and that's discretionary money, because my parents give me some money, so I want something, but I don't even need anything. I can't even figure out what I want, and so maybe this will tell me what I want. And so I clicked on the article, and I was looking through the 12 gadgets, and that was a letdown, because I didn't need or want any of those, and so then there was that tension. And only then, 10 minutes later, did I go, oh yeah, I'm supposed to be working on this series where we're just addicted to consumption. We laugh about that 1967 Senate subcommittee thing. I actually wonder if it's as off as we say. Just hear me here. Like, we laugh like, oh yeah, 22-hour work week, 27 weeks a year, yeah, whatever. But seriously, is it possible that those labor-saving devices have freed up as much time as they said they would, but we've unknowingly, unwittingly filled that time with, frankly, screens? Is it possible that really you're not productive for many more than 22 hours in a work week? Again, I'm not trying to put a bony finger in anybody's chest, but I wonder if we really analyzed our work life. And I'm grateful for a guy named Bill Hybels, who years ago, I worked in a culture where everybody kind of bragged about how many hours they logged in the office. And I heard Bill Hybels say years ago, don't try to impress me with how many hours in the office. I want to know how many hours you've been productive. I wonder if in a given work week, whether it's 40, 45, 50, 60, 70, whatever it is for you, if you were to analyze the number of hours that you actually do what someone pays you to do versus look at Facebook, if you would see that they maybe weren't as far off as we say. That we have all this leisure time, and yet the irony is we just feel busy. Why? Could it be because we are addicted to this dope called consumerism? And that Twitter and Facebook and email, while they all have a place, that they appeal to that want and need. Now, here's the good news. If this has any merit to it, if this idea of slowing down and finding a Jesus who could help you do that, if that at all appeals to you, the good news would be this isn't God's first rodeo. That when you look at the Israelite narrative, especially the one that involves the Exodus, them coming out of Egypt, they were enslaved by this very system. We think of Israel's redemption and freedom as this very religious thing where God took the right people and rescued them from the wrong people. But when you look closer at the narrative, what you see is a God rescuing a people from a relentless production schedule. That's really the story of the Exodus. Look at Exodus 5 with me for just a second. A guy named Walt Brueggemann has done some writing on this. He's this brilliant Old Testament scholar who made this observation. And to be honest with you, this book and this observation was kind of what derailed this whole kind of series for me. But I just want to read through a litany of verses from Exodus 5. Exodus 5 is where there's this thing happening between the Pharaoh and Moses and God about whether or not the Egyptians are going to let the Israelites go free. Starting in verse 4. But the king of Egypt said, Moses and Aaron, why are you taking the people away from their labor? Get back to work. Verse 5, then Pharaoh said, look, the people of the land are now numerous, and you are stopping them from working. Verse 7, you're no longer to supply the people with straw for making bricks. Let them go and gather their own straw, but require them to make the same number of bricks as before. Don't reduce the quota. They're lazy. That's why they're crying out, let us go and sacrifice to our God. Verse 9, make the work harder for the people so they can keep working and pay no attention to lies. Verse 10, then the slave drivers and the overseers went out and said to the people, this is what Pharaoh says, I will not give any more straw. Go and get your own straw wherever you can find it, but your work will not be reduced at all. Verse 13, the slave drivers kept pressing them, saying, complete the work required of you for each day, just as when you had straw. Verse 14, and Pharaoh's slave drivers beat the Israelite overseers they had appointed, demanding, why haven't you met your quota of bricks yesterday or today or before? Verse 16, your servants are given no straw, yet you were told, make bricks. Your servants are being beaten, but the fault is with your own people. Verse 17, Pharaoh said, lazy, that's what you are. Lazy. That's why you keep saying, let us go and sacrifice to the Lord. Now get to work. You will not be given any straw. You must produce the full quota of bricks. I challenge you, spend some time on your chair time in Exodus 5. What you'll see is a relentless narrative of production and consumption, as relentless as the Pharaoh's production schedule. And into this world where people only knew consumption and production, 7 days, 365, into this world comes the God of the burning bush. Into this world comes the God who says, I've heard the oppressed, hopeless cries of a people, and I've got a plan. Into this world, God says to a guy named Moses, I'm going to use you to emancipate these slaves. Slaves to what? To an unsustainable rhythm, to a production schedule where life is all about production and consumption. Take a closer look at Pharaoh. He is completely consumed by production and consumption. The whole narrative is about how he has to produce more so that he can save more just in case he needs it later. Not suggesting saving. Again, there's a balance that has to happen in this conversation. But what if God knows full well what it means to rescue a people from a life that is constantly spinning and never present and constantly surrounded but never relating and constantly thinking but never thoughtful and constantly talking about God but never actually ever really connecting to him? What I want to delve into next week, and admittedly we're not going to spend a lot of time in the text this week by way of introduction, but here's where I want to go next week. Because so God rescues these people, and the question becomes, what does he rescue them for? If he's rescuing them from consumption and production, what is he rescuing them for? Well, one thing we have to deal with in the answer to that question is the Ten Commandments, because of course the Ten Commandments were the very thing that he's rescuing them for. He tells them, here's what I want you to be, here's what I want you to do. But in the midst of this doing, in the midst of this being, in the midst of these things that you've seen on the sides of buildings and on billboards, there's one that's completely culturally foreign to us and yet very, very revolutionary in its day. Verse 8, remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servants. Notice it doesn't even just benefit you, nor any foreigner remaining in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, but he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath and made it holy. Part of what we're going to start exploring next week is part of what this God is saying at the very foundation of the Ten Commandments is, I am nothing like Pharaoh. A world that's all about production and consumption and too busy for anything else couldn't be more different than me. That's what God is saying. And this Sabbath idea, again, I'm not prescribing that. I couldn't. It'd be malpractice because I'm not far enough along in this conversation myself. So here there's good news, bad news. I think the good news is I'm not going to legalistically prescribe anything to you because I'm not a good enough systematic thinker to do that, and I'm still in this mess myself. The bad news means I'm not going to easily solve this for you. Like lots of pressing issues in our day, I can't give you the answer. What I can give you is the question. What does it look like to actually embrace and live out a spirituality that helps you slow down, that ensures that you're present in relationship, that ensures that you're thoughtful in your head, that ensures that you're actually connecting to God, not just talking about him or attending his things? See, the good news would be this isn't God's first rodeo. He's done this before. He's identified the problem before, and he's led people through and out of the problem. The bad news would be it comes at tremendous sacrifice. I love culture, and I intend to be a part of it, and I think that's our opportunity. But we also have to reconcile that the Sabbath in their day was a very culturally foreign thing. And if you don't have to look very far in the scriptures to see that the Israelites were much maligned for this value system, for this way of life. It was mostly unheard of to think that you would take a whole day where you could otherwise be productive and ensure your existence and not do that. So the bad news is I suspect that it's going to come at some kind of sacrifice. Now, it might not look like that kind of Sabbath day, but it might be a phone that's not in your back pocket. It might be a screen that's not on. It might be any number of things. The good news is I don't have a system to give you. I just don't. And sometimes I wish I do, and sometimes I'm glad I don't. But the bad news is I think what we're talking about here is real work. Real like couple work, real family work, real roommate work, real like get alone with your journal or go for a walk or do whatever it is you do to actually be present. Real that kind of work where you really dig in and go, okay, how am I doing? Am I just spinning? And if I'm going to do that, what's it going to look like the next time I get spit out the other side covered with all kinds of wounds and sores? Is this one going to cost me a marriage? Is it going to cost me a business? Is it going to cost me an addiction to something? Because I'm going to have to start escaping this occasionally somehow. What is it going to look like? So here's my question for you this week. And again, I'm looking forward to delving in next week, but I'll also understand if there's only 10 of you in the room. This week, would you spend some time going just, okay, what would it look like for us to start slowing down? What would it look like for me to start slowing down? And here's one of the ways, and I'll end here. Here's one of the ways I think you can begin to audit it. What's the value of this? I mean, here you are, and let's be honest. There's a plethora of podcasts out there, all of which involve better communicators and better ideas. And here you are, and let's be honest, there is a litany of music available to you, produced by professionals. You could listen to anything music-wise, podcast-wise. Here you are, and you work with people every day. You're surrounded by people all the time, and yet you're, See, here's one of the ways I think we can answer this is, what's the value of this? This 75 minutes. And what if part of the wisdom of Sabbath, the principle, not necessarily the rule, what if part of the principle of Sabbath involves taking this value, for whatever value it is for you, which what I hear from you often is it's this kind of starting point, it's this recentering thing, it's this launching pad. What if the wisdom of Sabbath is taking this principle and expanding it beyond this 175-minute period in one day? What would it look like to slow down some every day? And what would it look like if you slow it down on a weekly basis greater than just 75 minutes? What happens to the human soul when the iPhone is off for multiple hours at a time? Jesus, thanks that though you were on the planet in the body some 2,000 years ago, before we knew the light bulb and the microwave oven and the iPhone, that you're well aware. And I just think it would be arrogant, Lord, if we assumed that our cultural challenges are unique to us. It just seems like the way they come at us are unique. Jesus, I pray that as we try to bring some kind of harmony between our desires for you and our relationships with others and self and our pace, that you would connect some dots for us and give us some wisdom. I pray that there would be real, honest conversation that happens among couples and roommates and friends and parents, teammates. We love you, Jesus.
If you would like to engage further with Narrate Church, you can find contact information online, www.narratechurch.org. We would love to hear from you.